Welcome, everyone, to our second episode of Eye to Eye Purposeful Conversations. I'm Rika Berry, Vice President at Beech Acres, as well as the leader for our DEI strategy. I'm joined today by two wonderful guests.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jesiah, Chaplain and Diversity Executive for the YMCA of Greater Cincinnati.
Hey, everybody. My name is Ramsey Ford. I'm the co-founder and design director of Design Impact.
We're going to chat like we do all the time as friends about the holidays, right? We're coming out of November. We're coming out of December. We started a new year, a new version of COVID, all the new stuff. But I can imagine you gentlemen, like myself, probably encountered some good conversation with your loved ones throughout the holiday season. And oftentimes what happens during that season is there's a little bit of awkwardness that happens when you're sitting down with your family. And so today I'd like to kind of run through how to have those purposeful conversations, what that's like in your family dynamics, and then just really what this means for this moment in time for all of us moving forward. So I will open up with our first question and just kind of start us off. What would be some advice that you would have, Ramsey, for someone who is beginning a conversation around equity, around race, around diversity? What would be some advice for people?
You should be thoughtful that if you're having conversations that might be hard or across difference, that you should do so with care, because you hopefully do care about the people that you're family with and recognize that you want to maintain relationships. But you should also be firm, because the reality is you're going to be in a relationship with them for a long time. And if somebody needs to change to make your house or your table safe, then you have to be firm with helping them get there. So that's my thought, is that recognizing the people are actually your family.
You know, my father always told me that you can learn something if you listen well enough. And I've learned later, the technical term for that is cultural humility. And I think that one of the first rules about engaging in this type of work is you got to be humble. You can't come into it thinking that you know it all and you have all the answers. And it means you need to be at a place where you're able to listen and learn as much as you want to teach. And I think if we all come to the table and do that better, we all can come stronger. We can disagree, but we can leave still as family because we came at it from a humble way. So I would say that's probably the number one rule is remain humble, even if you think that you know all the answers.
That's great advice from the both of you. So let's do a little dive into how this works and how this maybe played out this holiday season for the both of you.
There's always some common values, you know, that grandma taught us, right? You don't get too much off of that, right? But because of our environments and the jobs that we do and the experiences that we've had and who we've married and all of these things then begin to inform our value system. And so it shifts kind of how we approach life and events and things that come up. Who did you vote for? Why did you vote? Are you getting the vaccine? Why aren't you you're crazy if you don't get the vaccine? You know, and we're having these debates at the table. And so one of the things I've learned is just because we look alike doesn't mean we are, is that we come from different places to a degree, and we got to respect that.
Yeah, I love what you said about just because we look alike doesn't mean that we are alike. And how about you, Ramsey? Share a little bit about, the family dynamic and maybe give an example of a conversation that you guys had.
My wife and I are both white, and we have two Black boys that we grew our family through adoption. For us, a lot of the conversations, really started having deeper racial conversations as a family around the time that we were thinking and considering adoption as a way to grow the family, and trying to really get the family on board to do that work that they needed to do. And I think that's where we also had really good conversations, but also kind of more challenging conversations around race, because even though, the family identifies as, liberal, there's a lot of growth that still needs to happen. And asking people to go through that change and growth can create conflict for people. So those are the kind of conversations that we end up having to navigate, around the holidays and, just almost, any given weekend, it seems like.
So first, as someone who has a special place in her heart for foster care and adoption, The fact that you and your wife have adopted 2 boys is a beautiful thing. And what a way to grow your family. And I love the piece that you shared around just because you're progressive or liberal doesn't mean that you don't have growth and that there's not an opportunity for space and awareness for you to even grow deeper in your understanding of differences and commonalities and how to show up in a respectful way in this space. So I love that. Jesiah, what was your first conversation about race? What was that like for you?
I have 2 answers. One was from my father, and another one was from a peer, and they were very, very different. So the one from my father was him ensuring that I knew that I was different and that that was okay. He was helping me to understand that the world was not going to treat me fairly because I was different from them. In fact, the world was going to view me as a threat. And because of that, I needed to be aware of my surroundings, be aware of how I carried myself to keep myself safe and make sure that I can come home okay. I remember one day we were driving in the car and my dad said, "Jesiah, get out. I want you to walk." And he wanted me to walk so he could watch how I carried myself to ensure that I could protect myself, walk with pride and honor, and so nobody would mess with me. And I think back to those moments as a dad. Now that I'm a dad myself, like, how am I going to help raise my son? So I remember that. But I also remember one of my peers, we're there at a YMCA event. We're all kids. So he was touching my hair and he was like, "Wow, feels like a carpet," and he was because to him it was different, this is, it's a Caucasian child. He doesn't know. And I looked around and it hit me at that moment, like, wow, I really, really am. And it was like one of the first times where we weren't just kids having fun. I was a different kid and I was different from all of them. And I realized how alone I was in that moment. And so I went back to what my father had taught me. And I had those dual ideas in my mind most of the time, that there is this pride that I can walk with, but at the same time, I can be a threat because I'm so different from the majority. And living in that dual space can be kind of stressful.
I love that answer. I heard safety. I heard being aware of the color of your skin and how that is perceived as a threat for some people. But I also loved the piece around legacy and pride.
I grew up in the city, I was, around, Black people that went to public schools. There's one thing that I also learned, even though it was comfortable being around people, was that we don't talk about race. And no one ever said that to me. No one ever said, "Hey, we don't talk about race." We just didn't. And that was a thing that was modeled. And I think it's modeled by a lot of white parents is, especially for my generation, it's just, you don't talk about it. And that's an incredible privilege to not have to talk about it, to not have to explain to your son how they might be perceived in this world and how to be careful around that. It's been what I would call a slow burn of learning throughout that process. And, didn't have role models showing me how to do it in my life, a lot of ways. And so that gives you great trepidation as like a white dad of Black kids, because conversations that we have right now are very much focused on, pride and power, on celebration, because we feel like that's what our kids need, because my guess is that there's going to be some negative messages that exist that they're going to run into that we need to prepare them for, but we also really want to focus on the strength in our household, especially at their ages.
The experiences of you and Jesiah may have been different, but I don't think the messaging that you're both sharing with your sons, I didn't hear a difference there. I heard a lot of commonalities, and I think that those are the things that continue to connect us, and partly why these purposeful conversations are so important to me is because it isn't always just about trauma and differences. Those things are important, but there are commonalities and shared values that we have as we are all humans. Mm-hmm. Some of this stuff is uncomfortable, and we know that it is. How do you navigate the discomfort?
The discomfort that we face when we're having conversations with family around inclusion and race is really that space, introducing white liberal individuals to this idea that they might have work to do. And I think that race can be a wound that like a lot of people carry deeply, and that a lot of people haven't addressed or done anything about. And so that moment you ask them to address it can be painful for people. And it creates some conflict, but it really, can trigger kind of a fight or flight response in individuals. And so a lot of when we were initially having these kind of conversations, that was what you would get. It would be pushback, it would be, hey, like, I'm not going to do that. That's not for me. What do you think? I'm a racist sort of conversations. And it's really uncomfortable to do that, and so I think for us, it was just that space of, I think, Jesiah said it really well earlier, which is, not assuming we know better, but like being humble within those spaces and just being patient.
Even though something's uncomfortable, even though something can be weird and can be challenging and can even be traumatic, my responsibility first to God is that I love the person as I'm loving myself, and that I represent who God is every day in everything that I do. And then if I get down, I have amazing people like Rika, like you, to say, hey, man, come on, you can do this. Hey, just kind of reset. It's all good. So that I can get back out there in the field and represent who God is, especially in this DEI space that people try to run away from because it can be so challenging and uncomfortable. Sometimes we feel like we are bridges, and bridges are meant to be walked on. When you think about like an umbrella, can you imagine an umbrella that will complain about getting wet? I mean, that's the purpose of it. So sometimes like we are solutions to problems. And then when we experience the problem happening around us, we want to pack up and go home, when God, that's what he created us to do, was to be solutions to problems.
So if I'm giving advice, what do you think holds people back from engaging in these kind of conversations that we're having today?
I'm going to let Ramsey go. Ramsey is the expert here. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I'm the expert, right? No, man, I love what you just said about that leading with love. I think that's so important in our world today. It's an easy thing to say. It's a hard thing to live out. And I respect, trying to do it. Also got to get some of those metaphors, because those are really good too.
Ramsey, I was thinking the same thing. Like, you dropped some gems. Some gems.
Yeah. To me, I think the number one thing is fear of conflict. It's just being afraid of being in conflict with people. And that to me seems like it's not universal, but it's a really normal human way to be. I mean, like, most people do not relish conflict, especially when we're talking about family. It's worth it, because, these family bonds and these spaces are, they're incredibly important for you as an individual, for our kids, for those to be strong, for those spaces to be safe. And what you realize is that, it's the best place to create change, because the bonds are that strong, because those relationships are deep and they can handle conflict. They can handle tension. It may not even be conflict. It may just be conversation. And that the ability for us to connect and listen to each other is where change happens.
That's good. I'm learning that conflict is not always a bad thing.
Yeah.
And that friction sometimes helps you to kind of get to where you need to be. Helps you to kind of get going. When you think about like a car, like it's drag racing, like they spinning the wheels and for this friction, and then it takes off. So friction and conflict's not always a bad thing. It gets you where you need to be sometimes, as long as we do so with love. So there was a class I went to, a cultural competency class, and the instructor said something that was very powerful, and it freed me in certain areas of my life. And she said that your approval does not mean that you have to agree. When you meet someone that's different than you and has a different value system that you have, you feel that you automatically have to agree. And if you don't, you're a horrible person. No. I can accept you for who you are without agreeing with it too. And that gives you space to be who you're deciding to be. Yeah. And it gives me space to stand on where I feel I need to stand on.
Fantastic. I'm walking away with several new metaphors that I will be using, because you threw the race car thing in. I never thought of that. I love that. But Ramsey, you said something about it's family, it's worth it, and that this is the best way to create change. And, Jesiah, the piece around, I don't have to agree. I think that that's key for us in how we move forward as leaders of this work, but also how we move forward in our networks and continue to influence others around giving spaces for people to be safe. Thank you, Jesiah, and thank you, Ramsey, for joining us today. And thank you for all of those who are tuning in to this second episode of Eye to Eye Purposeful Conversations.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, truly grateful for this space and grateful for the opportunity to continue to push these conversations and this work forward.